Sat Sri Akal. My name's Amma. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about Gusa, which means anger in Punjabi, and how I've dealt with it. Growing up, I thought that anger was a form of love based off the way my mum would speak to me, which was generally quite aggressive. Or I thought it was a way to effectively communicate your point across, which of course isn't the case. As we know, within the South Asian community, there's generally a lot of expectation as well. So that would definitely impact someone's emotions, especially when it comes to anger. So for example, it could be anywhere from like academic pressure or career pressure or what people would say. So those kind of expectations do weigh upon individuals, and that can, again, provoke you to feel a lot of negative emotions. I also think there's a lot of humor in the way social media portrays Punjabi parents to talk, and I think just general desi people when they talk, which can be quite aggressive, but I think it's funny at times because it is relatable. And in those times where I have had someone speak to me quite aggressively, maybe like an auntie or an uncle, I don't take it personally because I know it comes from a point of like just how they talk and their intentions are quite pure. But it does make me think that why were my parents and so many generations before them so aggressive and frustrated in the way they talk? And this wasn't only when they'd be upset or angry or frustrated. This would be on a day-to-day. So I really do question why they were in a constant state of distress, or was it because that's all they knew? Or they didn't know how to process their emotions? Or is it just the way Punjabi people talk? I'm sure it's a mix of things, so let's talk about it. When it comes to anger, that emotion is something that I don't particularly enjoy feeling, and I don't think a lot of people do, because for me, it feels very familiar to when I used to live at home. There was enough things that would upset me, so constantly being distressed and angry and frustrated was almost my norm. And I think a lot of our parents' generation and the generations before them may have felt like that. When I feel anger, it's such an overwhelming feeling, and it's to the point where my chest feels tight. I feel that rage. I feel my blood boil, and it's very uncomfortable. So when I left home, I was suddenly so much more zen because half the problems I was facing and the people that were upsetting me were no longer there. So I thought, oh, I've dealt with my anger. However, recently, I don't know if it's the moon and the stars, but I'm going to take some accountability here. I've definitely been feeling so unhinged and upset, and a lot has been happening. I find that anger is so exhausting and expensive to process and calm down from. It's actually really rare that I feel angry. It takes a lot for me to get to that level because I know what I need to do to not get to that level. So when I do, it's so exhausting. But what I found from healing is that when it comes to anger, it's not about what you're angry about as a whole. It's really more down to a very important need of yours that's not being met. So for example, the other day I was running late to a theatre show and I was super annoyed, I was grumpy, and I had planned my day in a way that I'd want everything to work out so that I'd be there on time. Luckily, I ended up getting there just in the brink of time and it wasn't too bad, even though I had to inconvenience a couple of people because I was sitting in the middle of the row. So the people were already sitting down and they had to get up. And in my head, everything felt like, oh my God, I'm being an inconvenience. This is the end of the world. That, oh my God, everyone hates me. In that moment, those feelings were so big and felt really big, and I wasn't able to control it. It wasn't the fact that I was running late that made me angry. It was the fact that I didn't have control over my time. I know deep down I'm a bit of a control freak. I don't know if it's because I'm a Virgo, but that's just how I've always been. I like things to be a certain way. I'm quite an organized person, especially when it comes to time. I like to think I'm a punctual person. So suddenly when that doesn't happen, I'm running late and everything feels overwhelming and all my emotions feel big. I'm angry because I'm out of control and I can't present myself as this punctual person that I like to present myself as. That's what was actually making me angry, because that need of mine wasn't being met. So from that example, I realized that just because I've moved out of home and half the problems in my life have been solved in terms of anger, doesn't mean that I don't need to have an actual way of processing anger now. And it definitely prompted me to look inwards and be like, cool, what do I need for myself to make sure I can calm down? So the next day, I took myself to the park, I meditated, I read a book, I had an online event with a really good friend of mine who was talking about like positivity and believing in yourself and just reminding myself like, it's okay to feel, it's okay to have these humanly experiences. What is more important is how you control your emotions for the betterment of yourself. So going back to my parents always being pissed off in the way they spoke to me and just a little bit aggressive, I don't think they ever got that space to decompress or have that friend to confide in about their frustrations or even acknowledge their emotions because they were constantly on the go. But to be clear, I'm not justifying the way they spoke to me in an aggressive way. It's just that I understand it a lot better and see it from a bird's eye perspective. From being spoken to like that, and I now understand that it's really important on how you speak to children, especially with desi households where arguments do happen. I think in every family there's going to be disagreements, but it's better to not do that in front of young minds that are so moldable and pick up on that body language and that aggression, because it creates an environment of feeling unsafe or being unable to voice your opinion or thinking that the only way to voice your opinion is by raising your voice or being angry. So speaking to younger people respectfully and helping them understand that if you are upset or frustrated about something, you communicate clearly about how you're feeling. Also from my experience, I remember how when I'd be in a heated argument with one of my parents, when one of them would raise their voice, that argument would automatically come to an end, because it was very much like a power dynamic where whoever's the loudest kind of wins. But even if they were in the wrong and I hadn't had the chance to put my point across, the loudest person would win that argument. And it was kind of messed up. So for me, I thought that was an effective way to communicate, which of course it isn't. And that is something I had to unlearn. Now, I know this might be a generalization, but the one thing that I cannot stand when it comes to arguing or having a disagreement with someone is when they become extremely defensive and they don't want to listen to what I'm saying, or they're speaking over me, or they raise their voice, or they walk away, or become really petty, or start mocking me, or just overall do not want to have an adult conversation about whatever it is that's frustrating us. And for me, I see that as a sign of emotional immaturity, because if you don't know how to have a difficult conversation with someone, then it makes resolving issues quite difficult. But I just can't stand having arguments with people who don't want to listen and talk over you, because it's just rude. Thankfully, the good thing with anger and how to manage it is the fact that there's a lot of information out there. And if it is something you want to manage, I will mention some points shortly in regards to how I work on it. But the top thing that I do for me is actually looking inwards and understanding that if I am feeling a negative emotion, especially when it comes to anger, I need to look within myself and understand what important need of mine isn't being met. And as soon as I understand that, it's a lot more easier for me to resolve it, calm down, reflect, and move forward. So first one I would recommend is practicing mindfulness. So that could be anything from meditation, yoga, deep breathing, going to a sound bath, whatever works for you, but just being able to be present and take a moment just to acknowledge your feelings. Number 2 is communicating effectively. So making sure you actually have someone to confide in. So speak to a friend or someone you trust, making sure you use words like I to help prompt that person to not feel so defensive. That way you can have a better conversation about your feelings by saying, I feel like this, I'm going through this, I feel overwhelmed, and so on. Number 3, and probably the most underrated one, is taking time outs, because when you're having a heated discussion or you're feeling angry, it's very easy to feel like everything's happening all at once and you can't just step away from it because it feels so deep in that moment. But remember that nothing is ever that deep. You can literally take a minute, walk away, have a breather, and revisit it when you're ready, rather than feeling like you have to have everything sorted out there and then when your brain isn't in the best space. Number 4 is seeking professional help if it's something that you feel like is becoming overwhelming and that you need a little bit more help with managing. And I understand it can be very scary, but sometimes having that professional support, be it therapy or counseling, can be a great way for you to better understand your emotions from a professional point of view. And the fifth and last point I would say is prioritizing self-care, going to the park and taking a minute out just to breathe and read and just meditate. It was amazing because that's what I needed for me to practice my self-care. So for you, if that looks like journaling or going for a walk or seeing your friends or trying an activity that's brand new, go for it. Make sure you do something for yourself to spend time with yourself, to get to know yourself better. So overall, being in a state of constant frustration and distress is not fun for anyone. And feeling angry is a normal emotion. Everyone feels it, but how you manage it is most important. And I think growing up with such a heavy emotion around me constantly normalized it for me, which is the case for many of our community. The way you speak to people is so important. I look at my parents when they were feeling frustrated and extremely snappy towards me and taking out their frustrations on me rather than seeking the support or speaking to a friend to process that would have helped me be an effective communicator a lot younger. So either way, I'm glad I've come out the other side of it, and so have my parents. Anyway, I do hope you guys are feeling a lot lighter. I don't know what's happening with the moon and the stars. For me, I've been feeling very intense and unhinged and saying and doing things that are so unlike my character, but I have been feeling a little bit better with the sun coming out. So if you are going through it, I am sending you so much love. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It definitely took me a while to put this together, maybe 4 days of journaling back to back, but I enjoyed this and I hope you guys did too. I thank you for watching. I thank you for listening. I'll see you guys very soon. Thank you. Dhanyavad. Sat Shri Akal. Bye.